everyone, and welcome to the Better Learning Leadership Conference, to our next session here. This is a panel discussion about educational partnership. My name is Ben Knight, and I'm the Director for Language Research at Cambridge University Press. Now, why are we talking about educational partnership? One of the things we've found increasingly is that if we want to be able to help our students learn better, that we can't do it just by ourselves, that a lot of the solutions now require us to work together with other organizations. And there is an increasing range of types of partnership out there. There's more opportunities, but also there are increasing challenges and difficulties. And so we felt this was a topic that a lot of you are interested in. And so we've brought together 3 educational leaders who have a lot of experience in this area of educational partnership, in order for them to share their experience and their perspectives on this and to answer your questions. Now, if you've got questions, it's best to put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box where we might miss things. I also wanted to say that we are recording this, so there's no sharing of slides, but you will get a link to the recording afterwards if you want to listen and share the discussion. So really looking forward to this and to your interaction, your participation in this. So let me start now by introducing our guests, our panelists. So first of all, we have Jane Mann, who is the Managing Director of Cambridge Partnership for Education, which works with governments, ministries of education, international development organizations to support programs of education reform. Cambridge Partnership for Education brings together the understanding and expertise in education reform from Cambridge Assessment and Cambridge University Press, supported by the collective knowledge and global network of the University of Cambridge. Jane has worked in the education sector for over 2 decades, implementing and managing programs to support international and national curricula, working with ministries of education, government agencies, NGOs, donor agencies, and education organizations to design effective materials and infrastructures. Jane has also worked outside the education sector, advising, training, and consulting on regulatory frameworks, trade publishing strategy, communications process redesign. And Jane is a member of the Center for the Study of Global Human Movement at the University of Cambridge, and is a BISA Executive Council member, as well as being a school governor. Thank you, Jane, for joining us.
Thanks, Ben.
Hazel works for Cambridge University Press in the English language teaching side, heading up the Learning Solutions team. Her team delivers educational services, including publishing, professional development, and research to a wide range of customers globally, unlocking potential through tailored English language teaching and learning solutions. Phil has worked in English language teaching and management in the UK and overseas. Thank you, Phil, for joining us. And Aidana Shilibekova is the director of the Center for Pedagogical Measurements at the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools in Kazakhstan, and has worked with Cambridge in a number of ways. Thank you for joining us, Aidana.
Thanks.
Okay, so what I was going to do was get all 3 of you to give a bit of your experience and perspective, and then we'll move into more question and answer. So let me start with you, Phil. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of partnerships that we typically work with within the English language teaching area of Cambridge?
Sure. It's quite a wide range of different types of partnership, as you were saying, Ben. So the first kind, I would say, is where there's an immediate need that we're serving with the partner. So a really good example of that is a piece of work that we're doing currently with a partner in Spain called the Fundación Amancio Ortega. And the Fundación found themselves in a position where they were sponsoring learners from less privileged backgrounds in Spain to go on scholarship programs across to North America. And in the pandemic context, and this year, they found that they couldn't do that. So they looked to us as a partner who could deliver an online learning and assessment experience to partly replicate the experience that the learners would have had if they'd gone to the States. So that was a very immediate need, which we were able to fulfill, and we're just delivering that piece of work at the moment. And then quite often, that sort of immediate need partnership translates and evolves into something which is more longer horizon, which is more about going on a journey together with a partner. So we have many partnerships of this type where we've worked with a partner perhaps for 6 or 7 years, and it's really broadened out from something addressing a very specific immediate need in the first instance into something which is much more multifaceted and which encompasses all of the areas around, let's say, learning materials, professional development, research, or assessment, all of those aspects of delivering education and teaching and learning. And then the third type of partnership that we tend to work with is co-publishing partnerships, where we partner with other publishers. Typically, we do this in Europe, but also in Asia. And what we do there is identify publishing partners who we can work with, where they have they're very established in the local market with a very good knowledge of that context. And we work with them in partnership to deliver learning materials into that particular scenario. And then the fourth one, which I shouldn't forget to mention, is our digital partnerships. And Cambridge English colleagues are doing some really interesting work in that area. They're working at the moment with Microsoft on a pilot project around Minecraft. And there's going to be a separate session later in the conference. It's on Thursday at the same time as this one. And I do recommend tuning into that one.
Great. Thanks, Phil. That's a really, really interesting range of partnerships there. But I was going to bring in Jane here because your Cambridge Partnership for Education is actually extending the kinds of partnership and the types of organisation that we work with, I think, quite a lot. Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ben. Cambridge Partnership for Education was very carefully named, I should say that to begin with, because the work that we do with governments in supporting their programmes of education reform means that we have to work in really close partnership and collaboration, not just with those governments and our other clients, but also with all sorts of different teams and stakeholders which are involved in the reform activities. So since we launched last year as a joint partnership, we've tried to make sure that we can consolidate the existing partnerships that we've got, but also that we look at new partnerships and new connections that we can make now that we're a joint unit. There's been a real shift in education reform programs in latter years towards these very large, broad, multi-strand initiatives, which cover a large number of elements across education systems, which one partner couldn't possibly deliver on their own. So we've been really actively expanding the number of partners that we can work in consortia with so that we can address these opportunities. And they may be reform programs that we work on with ministries or for international development organizations. And we often find ourselves actually working in consortia with organizations who we might previously have been in competition with. But I really like that kind of consortium work because I think we always learn so much from our partners as well in those situations. There's also the public-private sector partnerships, which are really growing up at the moment. And I think COVID has highlighted the value of those partnerships. And that's an area that we're really focusing on a lot more now, because those kind of partnerships can be tides that lift all boats across systems and be very supportive. So we're looking more at those PPPs. And we're also, we've got this huge privilege of being part of a university. So we are making sure that we actively deepen our links with the departments, the faculties, the centres, and the new initiatives across the wider academic University of Cambridge. Almost trying to position ourselves as that bridge between research and practice so that we can leverage that full weight of Cambridge expertise to support our programmes. And in that way, we recently partnered with 6 external experts as well as part of our advisory board. And it's fantastic to be able to convene those kind of partners to support us in our work. But lastly, we see our clients as partners. And that's why it's so fantastic to see Aidana here today, because Aidana represents Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools. And that's an example of a client who's become a partner. So whilst we previously worked with NIS as our client, we're now working in partnership with them to deliver a World Bank program in Kazakhstan. So that's a lovely loop when it comes back.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Jane. That's fantastic. And it really gives us a sense of how a lot of partnerships are now increasingly these multi-strand complicated projects which clearly depend on multi-partners and working together. Thank you for queuing in also, Aidana. Aidana, thank you very much for joining us. We would be really interested to hear more about your partnership with Cambridge. What is it you're doing? What you're trying to achieve? And what do the two partners each contribute to the project?
Yes, sure. Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools and Cambridge have a long and trusting relationship that we strongly value. I think, as Jane said, one of the key features of our partnership is the progress and advance. So we started as a Cambridge client on the assessment procedures in our schools, but today we are in collaboration implementing the World Bank project on the development of the assessment system in Kazakhstan. So this project has very ambitious and socially significant goals for our country. We are going to update the external assessment system, the national admission test, and the monitoring assessments, which could provide reliable and high quality results, as well as create equal and trusting conditions for our children. Good relationships between partners is the key to success. However, in our project, the requirement of locality is also relevant. It means achieving an integration of the best international practices which Cambridge represents and local experience which is based on the national and the cultural context of our society. So I think this synergy has a very positive effect on project implementation and can describe the main description of our relationship.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Aidana. That was very clear. And also bringing out that combination of international and local expertise as being the secret to the partnership, I think was really interesting to hear. So, so now we're going to open up into more discussion. Please throw in any questions you have into the Q&A box and we'll try to address those. I've got a few questions to kind of get things started. So my first question is, do you think educational partnerships are becoming more important these days? And if so, why? Jane, would you like to pick up on that?
I'll speak to that. As I've said before, you know, with our name, that partnership piece, the reason that we describe ourselves as the Cambridge Partnership for Education is because actually partnerships are at the heart of successful education transformation, 100%. And I think that, and it's not just education. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's an entire goal around partnerships. SDG 17 is about partnerships for the goals. And I think what that recognizes very clearly is that the strength that comes from these kind of inclusive partnerships that Aidana has just described, not just globally, which is important, but sort of regionally, nationally, locally, can bring much more weight and success behind programs. I think COVID has taught us really clearly that there was a time when actually our geographical distance could have meant that we became further apart. But I think all around the world, we've seen examples of people coming much, much closer together, despite the fact that we couldn't physically be together, because we know that in order to try and address some of these more complex problems, whether they be the ones described under the SDGs or otherwise, we've got to work in partnership. And that's partnerships between governments, between international development organizations, education specialists, but also, as I said, bringing in that private sector and philanthropy as well to play its part.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. And that's why I was thinking, Aidana, from your point of view, you know, you've chosen to work with Cambridge. Do you feel this is part of a trend that organizations need to be thinking more about partnership? Is it something, do you feel that all our people listening should be giving importance to?
Yeah, I agree with Jane, exactly. And also nowadays, I think that education undergoes a complex transformation aiming at increasing the quality of education. And it is important to reach out to other institutions, community, industry, and cooperate on enhancing educational opportunities and build a better world for our children. Exactly. And I think in a modern perspective, a partnership has acquired another feature. This is diversity, which makes it more progressive. That is, in fact, organizations that are uniting today may have completely different backgrounds, spheres, experience, interests, and bring to the best to partnerships. And such relationships are the top priority in current environments, especially for Nazarbayev intellectual schools today.
That's such a good point about this kind of diversity of experience and perspective. You know, we have a risk within Cambridge that we're very UK focused, and yet obviously education is an international activity that needs to combine perspectives from different parts of the world and different types of people. And I think in a way that kind of makes me think, are there particular situations which are best suited to partnership, where if you're in this kind of situation, this is where you should be thinking about partnership? Phil, is this something you'd like to comment on?
Sure, thanks, Ben. So I think we tend to think of partnership as, a way to plug a gap, right? I think we tend to look to the partnership model where we perceive a gap in our own capabilities or our experience or expertise. But I think equally, especially in the modern digital era, looking at platform and reach and also access as well. So I think there are various kind of facets of a potential gap that we might need to partner in order to fill. And I think if we just kind of delve into that a little bit more so mine is more of a B2B context, but if we look at that in a B2B context, then, one of the capabilities which a partner might be looking to find support with is around publishing. So we have partners who are very large chains of organizations who have their own publishing arm within their group of companies, but typically they wouldn't specialize in ELT specifically. So they would be looking to refine that capability, develop that capability within their group of companies, and that would be the kind of the need that they were looking to the gap that they were looking to fill. And it could be a question of expertise potentially, especially where the partner is a very established teaching and learning partner, but that ELT expertise is relatively unfamiliar or relatively new in some cases for them. And then this is quite characteristic of the partnerships that we form in China, that we have very sophisticated digital B2B operations where the platform is already very established and has very wide reach and is very successful. But there is a gap in terms of the actual learning material to plug into that really successful, sophisticated model. So that's where they're looking to partner with Cambridge to support that particular area. And then, to move back to the kind of Spain example that we were talking about earlier, Cambridge also obviously has gaps that we currently don't have capability or we don't have the capacity to fulfill. So a good example there would be that at the moment, direct teaching isn't characteristic of our offer. So we would work with a direct teaching partner to fulfill an example like the online learning program that I mentioned earlier. So it seems to me that the kinds of situations are typically where there is a need to develop capabilities or expertise or platform or reach or access, and that is done most effectively where we have organizations with missions and strategies that are very aligned. So I think we spoke earlier about, what is it that the partner's trying to achieve? And I think if we look from a Cambridge perspective, our aim, our mission is to unlock potential through the best learning and research solutions. So when we look to partners who have a similar mission, which aligns very neatly to ours, that tends to be, in my experience, the most fertile ground for really successful partnerships, grounded in a mission with a real focus on enacting a strategy to make that mission happen. and then creating the partnerships to enable that. And I think, to the point that Jane and Aidana were making earlier, even the largest organisations are at the current time not going to have all of their product and service portfolio, or all of the capabilities, or all of the flexibility, or the agility, or the breadth potentially. So that need to partner is very, very strongly there. And as Jane said, particularly in the microscope, I think in COVID times, that's really necessary. Even for the largest organisations, this has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that links, it can be linked to the question there's a question in the Q&A box, which is about being interested to hear how previous competitors evolved into partners. And I suppose it's quite possible that people who are competitors actually are in a similar frame of mind and have a similar kind of educational mission in the way that you're saying, Phil. I mean, I think it was Jane, you had mentioned that
Yeah.
thing. Would you like to say more about it?
I can speak to that. Yeah, absolutely. It's really that there was a time when a lot of the initiatives around education reform were very discrete, parceled up into certain little chunks, and you would find a lot of people going for those elements, and we'd find ourselves in competition then with other publishers, or perhaps other curriculum and assessment bodies, or teacher training. But now that there's been a real move towards understanding that all of these things need to be interlinked, you can't just deal with them in little boxes. The procurement for these reform activities is happening much broader as well. And so you've then got a choice. Are you going to stand on your own, try and do everything, and pit yourself against everyone? Or are you going to lean in and say, well, we think where we can bring greatest value is here. And if we talk to you and communicate with you, and crucially, if we know you beforehand, we can get together and provide a kind of really well collaborative, seamless initiative. And that thing about knowing each other beforehand is really important. You've got to start developing those partnerships before you need them, because if you're trying to forge them in the fire of a very short deadline, that's not necessarily the best conditions for success. But I think in addition to what Phil said, partnership can bring innovation in a way that you can't do on your own. People bring different perspectives, and we had an example of that recently around trying to solve some of the really tricky problems in education. And one of the things we were looking at was how to support the education of children who couldn't access formal education because they were either refugees or displaced, or for whatever reason they couldn't access formal education at the time. And we partnered with UNICEF and Microsoft on an initiative called Learning Passport, which brought together the Cambridge expertise in education, the UNICEF really deep understanding of how to support children who are in need, and then Microsoft's kind of substantial technological capability and weight. And there's no way that any one of us could have done that on our own. So I think that was an example where really you need to lean on each other to make things more powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, Phil mentioned earlier our partnership with the Minecraft game being something, of course, we recognize within Cambridge the importance of gamification, of the way that engages people, can engage them in learning. And yet, should Cambridge be trying to develop its own games? Should it become an expert in that? It's not going to be able to do that. And so partnership is one of the ways that we can innovate in the areas of education. I mean, some of the people listening to this will be thinking, I think there may be opportunities for partnership in my organization that we're looking to partner, but we're not quite sure how to find someone to partner with and whether it will be a success. I was wondering whether I could ask you about the kind of things that you would look for when you're looking for an organization to partner with. What is needed to make a partnership work? I don't know, you have experience of this. What would you recommend to people?
Yeah, sure. When Nazarbayev intellectual schools were being established more than 10 years ago, it was crucial for us to build a partnership with institutions notable for strong reputation and great ethics. In particular, we have been guided by the following three principles. Firstly, the organization must be a non-profit one and have experience of work both locally and in other countries. Secondly, the organizations had to be open and honest in matters of intellectual property law. We are attentive to keeping the rights to all joint developments, works, and products with partners. And thirdly, we always consider the possibility of capacity building of our staff on all the topics of cooperation. So sticking to these priorities allowed us to build effective relationships with many well-known organizations around the world, such as Cambridge as well, and CETA in the Netherlands, Johns Hopkins University, Arizona University, and Nazarbayev University here in Kazakhstan, and others. So I think this is could be as a suggestion from our side, from our experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in some ways that relates also to what Phil was saying about looking for organizations that align with your values and your mission. So in some ways I'm trying to link this to the audience here and thinking about educational leaders that are listening here, and they're thinking, is it worth the hassle of trying to set up a partnership like this? And is there anything that that you might say to kind of tell people, to persuade people that it is a good idea to invest that effort into partnership, what's to be gained from it? Phil, are there perhaps some examples as well that might kind of illustrate this?
Well, I definitely say it's worth the investment, absolutely. And it's good to recognise that it is an investment. I think it can be an investment in financial terms. If we think about the resourcing and the management of the partnerships, then we can see this as a financial investment. But I think more importantly, and to Jane's point earlier around really deep understanding of the partner, for me, it's an investment of time and knowledge, but one that really, really pays off. So if we think about spending the time to research and really get to know the partner, moving beyond that kind of superficial knowledge of the other organization, really deep into, like I said, what's their mission? What are they trying to achieve? What are their strategic objectives? How can we partner to get there and both derive mutual benefit from that partnership? Then that's where I see the real kind of investment focus. And I feel as if the return on that investment is maybe at two separate levels. So on a very practical, everyday level, we've had experience with partners where, just thinking of a partner we're working with at the moment, where they have a new process, a new way of working in terms of how they consult with their audiences and ensure that they're getting a really accurate capture of their points of view and their feedback. And it's a really interesting process that we haven't really used at Cambridge before. They taught us that process. We're really bought into it, really like it, and we're going to be using it ourselves as a new way of working. And then vice versa, we were looking at how we manage change within that partnership, and we recommended to them a change control process that we use within our organisation, which they hadn't come across before, and they were very keen to take that on board themselves. So this kind of very practical, everyday BAU kind of learning can happen from both sides. So I think that's important and that's useful. But for me, the real value is in the layer above that, where we're talking about what Jane was saying earlier. So the partnership delivering more than the sum of its parts. So the things you can do together are things you would not be able to do separately or as kind of separate organizations running alongside each other. The partnership should develop that further and allow the innovation point that was mentioned earlier, or just a greater benefit can be delivered than would be possible with the two organisations working alone. So I think all of those are very true. And then the third point, just to what Aidana mentioned earlier, which I think is really important, the diversity point on if you're working with a new partner, you're getting a new point of view and you are ultimately developing a new way of seeing the world. And I think those are the reasons why people should invest.
I mean, I'm thinking, Jane, you've got to experience a lot of partnerships. Are there things that you felt you've gained from particular partnerships?
Oh, enormously. I mean, just speaking to the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools partnership, as Aidana said, actually, the relationship with Cambridge goes back a very long way. And I suppose probably for a little while at the beginning, that the one common element for all of the Cambridge partnerships was the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools. And so we almost looked to them to teach us around how we could be as collaborative as possible in that sense. So that open communication was really critical. And I think also what has been mentioned previously is that thing around local context. You've already mentioned, Ben, you know, that there is a risk potentially of an organisation like Cambridge being far too just Cambridge centric. And if we're going to actually be able to affect change globally, we need to understand the context in which we're working. And local partners bring so much when it comes to that. And they can teach you so much about understanding how things operate in that country, who are the big stakeholders. There are little cultural elements that you can learn from each other, which just help to smooth, you know, the wheels of the system, but also big lessons around when to listen, when to speak, when to act, when to support, because it's only really by looking from the people on the ground, and looking to the people on the ground to learn that we can learn more ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting that there is this kind of intercultural element to this and different perspectives. I'm reminded of the project that we work on with Cambridge Life Competencies Framework, which sets out the kind of broad competencies that people need in addition to language skills and curriculum subjects, like collaboration and critical thinking. And we kind of have ways of describing those. But when we work in collaboration with organizations, with schools and teachers in other countries, the principles of collaboration are the same, but the way that those are manifested in behaviors can sometimes look different. And so understanding how the behaviors we're trying to develop look in different parts of the world is really important to avoid this kind of potential cultural imperialism that can come from a very UK perspective. So,
I remember, if I could just share one example of that, was really early on in working internationally, I was working on some maths materials, and I remember that our partner at that point came to me and said, "Why are you so obsessed with time? All of the examples that you give in maths are around time. What you have to remember is you Brits, time might be a very, very important element to your daily life, but to the rest of us, there are other things that matter more than what time the bus appears or what time the tea arrives or whatever." And it was just a great little micro example of a more macro situation that we just need to remember that we're all different. We can all bring something new.
And when someone says something like that, you look back at your materials and realize, yeah, we're obsessed with time for some reason. I know. It's very interesting. Well, I think we're kind of running out of time. If there's anything more that you feel we haven't missed that you wanted to say, please, please pipe up. Was there anything else that you wanted to add? You're okay. You feel you've had your chance. Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic discussion. Really interesting points you've made, and I think there'll be inspiration to people listening here about what they can gain from partnerships and to start thinking about what the opportunities are out there.